Hi there folks, today I'll be showing you a short video about three ways in which we use pig fat. So our neighbors next door harvested one of their pigs right after New Year, and they gave us as a gift a piece of the back fat, which is like a sheet of fat about that thick that is coming from the backside of the pig, and the piece was about this large. So we had to do something with it in order to preserve it. The most logical, quick, and probably easy way to deal with any amount of fat is to render it or melt it and use it for cooking afterwards. And we did some of that, but not too much because we already have from previous years enough of jars of melted rendered pig fat which we can use. So we did two other preparations. The first one is salting the whole piece of pig fat, which is done in two stages. First, you keep it in plain clear water for 1 or 2 days. By changing the water several times a day, it draws out the blood of the little tiny vessels which sometimes permeate the fat, and then afterwards it's salted with coarse salt. Neighbors' dogs are going because it's time for their evening meal. So then you cover the whole piece with salt, and it draws some of the moisture out. It also allows salt to enter the fat and sort preserve it. And afterwards the whole piece is rinsed off, and then it's kept for a week in sour cabbage brine. And there are a lot of variations in that process, but what I did is just use the sour cabbage brine to flavor the fat, the whole fat piece, and also to even out the salt content, because when you keep it covered in coarse salt, it usually sucks in as much salt as possible, so you end up with a very salty product, which is of course more durable. You can preserve it for longer, but you have to keep it in water before eating to draw some of the salt out, otherwise it's very salty. And by keeping it in the sour cabbage brine, it kind of levels out the salt content, so it's good for direct eating, and it also has some of the flavor from the fermented cabbage imparted to it. And then after I kept it for a week in the sour cabbage brine, I did two things. First, it is put some condiments on it and set it to dry. Of course, it won't be bone dry like a dry cured meat, but it will reduce in moisture and it will become more firm. And it usually takes 2 to 4 weeks depending on the temperature and the weather. Currently we are in a bit of a warm spell, but we're expecting from early next week lower temperatures, so you need the daily temperatures to not exceed maybe 5 degrees, otherwise you risk the fat to spoil. And the other thing which I did is to store some of the fat in jars like this one. This is called here dry canning, where you don't add any liquid, you only add the fat. Each of the pieces is salted lightly with fine salt, and then you just stick them inside the jars, and you put the jars to boil for a few minutes so the contents get hot and the pressure seals the cap. And this can be stored in a cool basement easily for 2 years. I already have similar jars from 2 years ago, and they're perfectly edible. You can also later uh, take this out of the jar if you need melted fat. Keep it for a day in water to draw the salt out, and then you render it, and you can still use that for uh, cooking fat if you don't have enough time to render all the stuff. This is much quicker and much easier for our context. And this is how I do the fat rendering. Nothing special here, just keep it on low heat until all the cut fat pieces turn liquid. And it's important to keep the heat low as to not burn the fat. Afterwards, just strain the leftover pieces and you get your rendered fat. You can see that I have still lots of large pieces left over, and that's because I didn't have enough time to finish the rendering. I had to start working on dinner, and also you can save those pieces and use them directly in cooking, like in a stew or something, and they will render while you're cooking the regular meal. You can directly pour the melted fat in jars and store it that way, but I do an extra step. This is the fat which I left overnight to solidify, and now I'm melting it again slowly. And the idea is to add some baking soda to it after it melts. When the fat solidifies, some of the pieces which passed through the sieve, they sediment at the bottom or at the top. So you want to remove those ideally, and the baking soda helps you with that. It makes the fat start to foam, and you can use a spoon to remove that foam, which usually contains small particles, and you end up with very fine fine grained salt. And also, when pouring in the jars afterwards, try to leave the pieces on the bottom out of the jars. You can see here how it started to foam when I added the baking soda. I stir it to dissolve the baking soda, and then I'm using a spoon to remove all of the foam when it reaches higher temperature. This foam usually contains small pieces of impurities, which is good to be removed, especially if you're using the fat later for cosmetic purposes. And after I have removed all of the foam, I'm pouring the fat carefully in those jars I have prepared. And those are the ready jars with the fat poured into them. I'm just setting them outside in the cold weather to solidify overnight, and then I'll be storing them in the basement. And those are the ready jars. The fat has solidified, and you can see at the bottom there is no sign of any residue or any small particles, which is what I always strive for. You can see that one of the yard cats has also expressed interest. So that was all for today, and I'll see you the next time.